Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 16th, 2021. Time for another show. And, well, all right. We were about to get set, starting off. I had some idea, I guess, exactly how we might begin things. But we got to change gears again because it's been, as you know, about 15 seconds since we began the show under the cloud of a mass shooting. And we're back now. Just in case you may have happened to have missed the last one, which I guess I got wind of in between, I don't know, like midnight, 1 in the morning, today, last night in the common parlance, I guess, and then early this morning. So I guess we have to catch up on and acknowledge the fact that this latest one happened. We're now talking about the Indianapolis area. 8 people killed, more injured in shooting at a FedEx facility near the Indianapolis airport. For that, picking up on the local-ish paper, the Indianapolis Star, Alexandria Burris and Sarah Nelson writing this piece, and I'm sure they wish they didn't have to. Let's see. It begins with a correction, with several, I guess, corrections and clarification. A previous version of this story, which we won't be reading, I guess, misstated where the shooting took place. It occurred at the FedEx ground facility. I don't know what the initial reporting was. That's the way I heard it, but I guess I had already heard the corrected version by the time I got up. 8 people killed during a mass shooting at the FedEx ground Plainfield Operations Center late Thursday, according to Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department spokesperson Janae Cook. The victims were found dead at the scene, Cook said during a briefing after 3 a.m. Friday. Those killed had injuries consistent with, you'll never believe it, gunshot wounds. The gunman found dead in what was believed to be a suicide nearby. Once again, the bad guy, not only a bad guy with a gun, but the bad guy with the gun actually stopped the bad guy with the gun. How weird. We are being made aware of multiple other people with injuries who have been transported to local hospitals or have transported themselves to local hospitals. 4 people were transported by ambulance, 1 in critical condition with, of course, injuries consistent with gunshot wounds, 3 others transported with various injuries, according to police, 2 treated at the scene and released. Luckily, multiple others walked into different local hospitals. Late Friday morning, IMPD noted that 5 victims with injuries consistent with gunshot wounds transported to local hospitals for treatment, 2 treated by medics at the scene and released. All right, so we're going back and forth over numbers at this point. Oh, by the way, this is a tragedy. I thought we'd throw that in there. That's what the wonderful spokesperson had to say about this thing. That actually comes up next. Then I guess sort of the on-the-ground details that the Indianapolis Star is able to offer, like where there are family reunification centers, and the fact that we all know what those are now is pretty astonishing. I wonder what people in other countries think if you said, family reunification center. Does your mind go to natural disaster or mass shooting? I'm not certain which one comes up first. I don't think we're at the point yet where anybody has found any motive or anything, but we are, of course, in, thoughts and prayers mode for sure. And, of course, I see a lot of interesting discourse this morning over whether or not it is any longer appropriate to say, to use throwaway lines like, this is a senseless tragedy. I mean, of course, it doesn't make any sense to anybody wrapped up in it, and no amount of investigating ever really will make sense of it, but it's just another reminder of we got ourselves here on purpose, and we refuse to leave, and every time somebody suggests that maybe we should do something, and lots of people agree, we get Mr. Potato Headed and Dr. Seuss out of it, and it's likely to happen again. I don't know what else to tell you. You could, of course, distract yourself from the mass shooting with the latest news about the latest controversial police shooting, which actually happened last month, but is launched into the headlines in the last couple of days by the release of body camera footage that shows just what we were dealing with. In this case, the shooting of a 13-year-old in Chicago. Police killed Adam Toledo is his name, and the video is out. You may have taken a look at it if you're one of those people that really is disturbed by tragic and horrific shooting videos, and a lot of us are. And yeah, I would recommend staying away from that one, but it's really quite remarkable, and another one of those situations where we'll now fight over it with arch conservatives who will somehow imagine that they're launching a career for themselves as a provocateur by coming up with excuses for why it was okay to shoot anybody but a 13-year-old. And now, of course, the video, it's very quick. I'll say that. If you can't watch it, I'll tell you this much: that cop is out of the car maybe 20 seconds before he's shot this kid, and he's actually facing this kid for less than a second before he shoots him. It's really quite remarkable. And the story from the police end is, of course, thought he had a gun, which, of course, is everyone's right. And, everyone should be carrying guns all the time, except if you are facing the police. And, I don't know. I'm not up to date on police tactics or anything. There's a lot of discussion this morning on Twitter about apparently police all over the place are receiving specific training, and that is good in itself, but specific training about how to react to various kinds of threats that you and I probably believe ought to be treated differently. And it seems like the training is basically to say, no, you must treat everyone as though they had a gun. And, of course, anybody who actually has a gun, whether they look like innocent people with guns or not, you can't hesitate because your life is on the line, which is true. But, of course, and I do remind you, that is the job. And you'd think you'd get used to it at some point. But maybe you never get used to it. But I also happened to see somebody tweeting around a picture of a protest sign today that makes the point that we do now live in a country where trained police, it's okay for them to kind of panic and fear for their lives and shoot first, ask questions later. But the rest of us, the civilians, having to deal with the police, you're supposed to act calmly and rationally when a gun is pulled and stuck in your face. And you've been reading all over the news for how long now that police are intentionally, accidentally, inadvertently, just happened to roll out of bed and kill somebody this morning or whatever. And but you should remain calm in all of this. They might think they have a taser and think it's okay. And that's another interesting thing too, right? I thought it was a taser. Well, why did you think it was okay to discharge your taser? We could have a whole other discussion, as we've had on the show before, about the use of so-called non-lethal weaponry. Anyway, that one turned out to be lethal, but it was because they had the wrong one. And it's not the first time we've seen that either, by the way. I'm sure longtime listeners to the show actually remember the last time a police officer shot and killed somebody and said, "Oh, I thought it was my taser." Do you remember that? It was a guy, it was the reserve deputy officer. What's his name? I think his name was Robert Bates. I looked it up not that long ago because this story reminded me of it. And and now, of course, I'm trying to think, do I remember the name of the person he killed? And I think I do, except that I'm a little confused about it. But I think the guy's name was Eric Harris, but that's also the name of one of the shooters at Columbine High School from way back, like vintage school shooting days, back before I think we knew what we were in for exactly, even though by then there had been a pretty clear record about school shootings anyway. But yeah, I think that they share the first and last name, and I think at the time the reporting was insistent on putting this guy's middle name in, maybe because of that, I don't know, or maybe it was just a thing about being formal. But anyway, Robert Bates remember that not only did he do this ridiculous thing, and I thought it was my taser, but I jumped on top of him and shot him, but that he was a reserve deputy in the sheriff's office, and that it turned out he was one of these reserve deputies, like if you are a benefactor of the department, they'll let you ride around and pretend you're a cop. And what a story. Anyway, by the way, that excuse did not work for him. And he was convicted of, some lesser charge than murder, a manslaughter charge, I think, and sentenced to a couple of years. I guess we could follow up and figure out whether he actually served that time or not. But that was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I don't know, 2015, maybe, thereabouts. I don't know whether that holds any sway in Illinois or not, but yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a record of what you do with these cops that make this mistake about which gun they're holding, it didn't work in Tulsa. And it wasn't, that too wasn't the only example, but I think it was the only, a horrific example that it actually resulted in somebody's death. But cops actually have made this mistake fairly frequently. I don't know. I mean, they've started making the tasers out of yellow plastic. That's supposed to be a big visual signal. Maybe they just need to make them so that they're not shaped like guns, but I think they're shaped like guns for quick deployment. Anyway, I just, one day I guess I'll do a little more learning about exactly how they're training police. But the big chatter this morning on Twitter, so I got here, was about how they're training cops with this no hesitation program, and that they're doing it by training them in like situational tactical shooting ranges with targets. I don't know whether they pop up like they do in the movies or whatever, but the targets are things like little kids holding guns and pregnant women holding guns, and it's supposed to train you in this no hesitation program, which I'm sure is great from sort of the cop's perspective in terms of, yeah, I'm going to protect myself now, and they're giving me license to have no hesitation about these things. And you can sort of understand where the impulse comes from. Don't hesitate because your life is on the line, etc. But again, that's the job. And, other people get killed on the job, and they always say they knew what they were signing up for. I mean, they never say that about cops for some reason. I don't really know why that is not the case, but at least politicians never say it about cops. And again, my other sort of concern is about this no hesitation thing is, I'm probably wrong about this, and I don't really understand the dynamics of things or how often cops actually are wearing this on the job. But I guess I was sort of always under the impression of, well, that's why you go to work in a bulletproof vest, so that you're the one. Anybody else, you might say, well, no hesitation is probably justified. A gun appeared, it was being pointed at me. I didn't know what to do. I had a gun, and I'm not a trained police officer. I shot. This is terrible, but that's what I did. Whereas police officers, like, you can actually take them aside and spend entire days saying this, you need to train for facing down a gun and waiting to see exactly what's happening. And that's why we give you Kevlar vests, and in tactical situations, the everything else, flashlights, shields, helmets, etc. And I understand that that's not always guaranteed protection against gunshot wound, and you got to react quickly regardless, and today's guns are blah, blah, blah. All of this is true, although today's guns being so powerful that the Kevlar vest isn't that much protection is actually an argument I wouldn't mind having, and we could keep bringing it up, and you guys keep saying freedoms, but, well, not you guys. But anyway, maybe anybody who has more expertise in that, feel free to chime in. But I mean, I always thought, I'm sure the real excuse for giving them Kevlar vests was, well, anytime you could be fired on, we want to give you the best odds. But to me, this is one of several shootings where this has come up for me, and I've never really seen a complete answer about it. But I thought we were arming cops, not only arming them with pretty good, easy to deploy, quick to use weaponry, but bulletproof vests, as they call them in the common parlance, and sometimes body armor, and in an effort to give them the possibility of pausing at least just for that split second to try to figure out what's going on. I know that gives an unfair advantage to the suspects in these situations. But again, that's kind of what I thought the job was. All right, well, let's see. It's time to move on from that. All right, well, we went directly into that, so we didn't have time. And now it just feels wrong to go back and read the cheery morning tweet. Not like Bill's trying to disrupt us or anything. But we had a cloud appear, several clouds appear very shortly before the launch of the show. So we went with that direction instead. Lots of other things going on, of course. And I'd like to parse through some of those things. Some of them parked here in overnight in Pocket. More discussion to be had about what a traitorous spy and nest of spies Donald Trump and his administration were, with a new report out that everything you thought was true about Russian collusion turned out to be true. Isn't that great? It's supposedly new news. How do we even dive into this? There's a couple of stories that I put aside, but now I'm trying to think of where's the one that I initially put out there. I think might be in my Twitter feed rather than in Pocket for whatever reason. But it's probably the story I put aside will also identify the report that's out there. But basically, I guess for the first time, they've released publicly an intelligence assessment that lays out that the polling data that Paul Manafort was giving to Konstantin Kilimnik was in fact making its way all the way back to Russian intelligence operatives, which kind of was always supposed to be the suspicion in all of this. But I guess it's now, I don't know whether it's like newly established or whatever. I have this New York Times piece, which wasn't the first one I saw, but was the only one I managed to put away in Pocket. Anyway, the intelligence on Russia was clear. It was not always presented that way. And this one sort of takes a different angle on some of these things and probably has some links to some of the earlier stories. But I guess if we dive in halfway into the development of the story, that'll save us some time. A newly declassified intelligence report, says the subheader, made clear that government agencies long knew of Russia's work to aid Donald Trump. What? But he and allies muddied the waters. That is incredible. I can't believe that he would do such No, I know. It's very hard to believe. But what can I tell you? There it is. Now, as they say, we'll use another sound effect.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal. You get nothing. You lose.
Well, he didn't.
Good day, sir.
He won the election, allegedly. Now he claims he won the other election, and then he held an insurrection, and he threatened to kill Mike Pence, and they sacked the Capitol, and we're all just like, well, that sometimes these things happen. There's really nothing we can do about it. Everybody went home. What are we going to do about it? Right? So eventually, in about a year, somebody will get prosecuted, and some things will happen, and they might spend some time in jail, and we'll all look back on this thing and laugh one day. Anyway, this is the work of Julian Barnes in the New York Times. The article, look at this. It's been updated. It was published on March 17th somehow and updated April 15th. So I guess this will reflect the reporting of yesterday. Where's maybe I should just go over to like Google News and see what there is in the first couple hits here. Let's see. Biden administration says Russian intelligence obtained Trump campaign data. I guess is the latest of the New York Times pieces here. So a Treasury Department document, it says now, has shed more light on links between the campaign and Russian spies. Perhaps I'll read this one instead because it was later developed as opposed to this updated piece. The updated piece was sort of being offered in terms of more focusing on what Trump had done to try to hide his tracks in all of this. But what did the tracks say? Let's look at that one. This is Mark Mazzetti and Michael Schmidt, also in the New York Times. They're getting a lot of play today for their $1 a month or whatever it is that we pay them. Don't get too excited, Armando. I need these stories. The Biden administration revealed on Thursday that a business associate of Trump campaign officials in 2016 provided campaign polling data to Russian intelligence services, the strongest evidence to date that Russian spies had penetrated the inner workings of the Trump campaign. Of course, we already knew that Turkish and maybe also Russian spies had already penetrated the campaign in the person of international super spy Mike Flynn. But okay, it's only been my pinned tweet since November of 2016. The revelation made public in a Treasury Department document announcing new sanctions against Russia. That was the impetus for this. And of course, the incidents outlined here are the impetus for the sanctions. But the news hook, the sanctions are the impetus. Isn't that interesting? The revelation made public in a Treasury Department document announcing these new sanctions established for the first time that private meetings and communications between the campaign officials, Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, and their business associate were a direct pipeline from the campaign to Russian spies at a time when the Kremlin was engaged in a covert effort to sabotage the 2016 presidential election. Previous government investigations have identified the Trump aide's associate, Konstantin Kilimnik, Konstantin V. Kilimnik, if you're into the middle initials as Russians are, as a Russian intelligence operative, and Mr. Manafort's decision to provide him with internal polling data was one of the mysteries that the special counsel, remember that asshole? Sorry about that, Robert Mueller, sought to unravel during his 2-year investigation into Russia's election meddling. We don't know what happened. Well, we all know what happened. I won't say what happened because rules and regulations. During the 2016 U.S. presidential election campaign, Kilimnik provided the Russian intelligence services with sensitive information on polling and campaign strategy, the Treasury Department said in a news release. Additionally, Kilimnik sought to promote the narrative that Ukraine, not Russia, had interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, which of course was Rudy Giuliani's part in the initial big lie and led him to believe that he was entitled to make the claims in the second or 15th rounds of big lies after the election. Anyway, we should arrest him and throw him off a cliff. But we don't do that here. The Biden administration provided no supporting evidence. No evidence was provided, and you know what that means. When the New York Times says that, that's a big lie, and so I'm sure conservative world will run away with that one. No supporting evidence to bolster the assessment that the Russian intelligence services obtained the polling data and campaign information. It's kind of weird that they wouldn't do that. A little troublesome, really. Why issue the report, really? Anyway, I mean, it's true, but we already knew it, so if you didn't provide the information that backed it up, then I don't know why you bothered releasing it. But who fights against sanctions imposed on Russia for any reason at this point? Anyway, the release shed no light on why Mr. Manafort and Mr. Gates gave polling data to Mr. Kilimnik, although previous government reports have indicated that Manafort thought Trump campaign strategy information could be a valuable commodity for future business deals with Kremlin-connected oligarchs. Having the polling data would have allowed Russia to better understand the Trump campaign strategy, including where the campaign was focusing resources at a time when the Russian government was carrying out its own efforts to undermine Donald Trump's opponent. Mr. Gates said in a statement on Thursday that the Treasury Department had failed to provide any evidence to back up its claim, and I guess the New York Times agrees, adding that the polling data passed periodically to Kilimnik at Paul Manafort's direction, and that this stuff was simplistic and outdated, never in real time. It was from both public and internal sources, Mr. Gates said. And so, by the way, take note of that, please, Russian oligarchs. Russian oligarchs, if you're listening, the data that Paul Manafort gave you to settle his debts was simplistic and outdated. And I guess you'll just have to do what you do, being oligarchs and all. Anyway, it was from both public and internal sources, but I'm sure it passed off as super valuable, and you might want to settle that debt with Mr. Manafort if you feel cheated. It was not massive binders full of demographics or deep research. It was top-line numbers and didn't contain any strategic plans. The new sanctions against Russia are in response to the Kremlin's election interference, efforts to hack American government agencies and companies, and other acts of aggression against the United States. The sanctions now make it extremely difficult for Kilimnik, who was indicted by the Justice Department in 2018 on charges of obstruction of justice, to engage in financial transactions, that may involve the United States. It is unclear how long American spy agencies have held the conclusion, I'd say about 5 years. Senior Trump administration officials, fearing Trump's wrath, repeatedly tried to keep from the public any information that seemed to show Trump's affinity for Russia or its president, Vladimir V. Putin. Coincidence? V? I don't know. Mr. Kilimnik had been a longtime business partner during Manafort's time as a political consultant in Ukraine. In 2018, prosecutors for Mueller's office announced that Kilimnik had, quote, ties to Russian intelligence, and that Manafort had instructed Gates to pass the polling and campaign information to Kilimnik. The Senate Intelligence Committee went further last August in its bipartisan report that scrutinized the links between the Trump campaign and Russia, calling Kilimnik a Russian intelligence officer. The report contained several significant redactions that appeared related to Manafort and Kilimnik, but said that Manafort's willingness to share the information with them represented a grave counterintelligence threat. The report called the relationship between Manafort and Kilimnik the single most direct tie between senior Trump campaign officials and Russian intelligence services. The Senate report portrayed a Trump campaign stacked with businessmen and other advisors who had little government experience and presented attractive targets for foreign influence, creating notable counterintelligence vulnerabilities. Other people have expressed the same situation as seeing the Trump campaign stacked with spies and turncoats. But I bet that didn't make it into the official reports. We'll be back with more about this and other stories in just a moment. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Now I realize how it is that I ended up on the updated story, but I guess we can explain that later. But essentially, looking through my Twitter feed for, what was my evolution of exposure to the story. I guess the last thing, I'm just like Trump in this sense, right? The last person to speak to me on it, I guess, gets top billing. And in this case, it was Justice himself retweeting an Adam Goldman, New York Times reporter, Adam Goldman thread on the subject, the updated subject, linked to this now newly updated piece explaining the other half of the story, which is not only that, okay, now they're announcing for the first time, I guess, publicly about Kilimnik or making the allegation that Kilimnik's the polling information that he got from Manafort went directly to Russian intelligence, to the other half of the story, which is really about how hard Trump and Trump administration officials worked to cover their tracks. Perhaps we should get to both of these stories. So there's a little bit more, I think, in this Times piece that we were in the middle of when we stopped for our break. Let's see, what was the last thing we got through about that one? The Trump campaign basically being stacked with what they say is businessmen who had little government experience and presented attractive targets for foreign influence. That's short for spies. A New York Times article in 2017, is that the one that we were looking at? No, not that old. Okay. The one, a New York Times article in 2017 said there had been numerous interactions between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence during the year before the election. Yes. FBI officials had disputed the report. Oh, yes, remember that? And, of course, the Times gave them top billing at the time, right? This is all garbage. P.S., it's all actually true. Right. So, 2017, the Times article said there had been numerous interactions with the Russians during the year before the election. FBI officials disputed the report, but both the Senate report and the Treasury Department document, this new one, confirmed the article's findings, as did the period from 2017 to 21, really, until he finally got set to leave office but sacked the Capitol on the way out. The assertion that it was Ukraine, not Russia, that sought to disrupt the 2016 election has long been both a Kremlin talking point and, curiously enough, a claim by Mr. Trump that foreign actors tried to help his opponent, Hillary Clinton, rather than him. So then he took out his wrath on Ukraine. And so you can see it's all very rational why he tried to blackmail the Ukrainian government and then further that story. Mr. Trump's obsession over Ukraine's supposed role in the election was the impetus for a 2019 phone call with the Ukrainian president that was central to the first impeachment proceedings against Mr. Trump. Mr. Manafort was brought into the Trump campaign in March 2016 at a time when Mr. Trump was had largely sewn up the Republican presidential nomination. Manafort and his longtime business associate Gates joined the Trump campaign after years of doing political consulting work in, weirdly enough, Ukraine, where they met Mr. Kilimnik, a Russian army-trained linguist. The two men met with Mr. Kilimnik several times after joining the campaign, and in June 2016, Manafort became the Trump campaign chairman. And as you may recall, he was, in fact, brought on board initially to run the effort in coordinating with the RNC and run the Republican convention. And then the only thing that actually happened at the convention that was out of the ordinary, something that wasn't an autopilot measure, was changing the RNC, the Republican National Party's platform with respect to dealing with Ukraine and Russia. It was a little strange. Anyway, details about Mr. Manafort's relationship with Kilimnik were revealed in 2018 as the government prosecuted Manafort and charged Kilimnik with obstruction of justice for trying to coach potential witnesses in the investigation. Kilimnik never came to the United States to face charges. He's wanted by the FBI, and the Bureau is offering $250,000 for information that could lead to his arrest. And Manafort got a bunch of pardons and sentence commutations because Trump totally is on the up and up and is handling this transparently. You know the story. I guess now we can jump over to the newly updated piece from Julian Barnes that I guess gets at the second half of the, I guess, bigger story, believe it or not, of today. So let me jump in here. Again, this was originally published on March 17th and was updated yesterday in light of the new material. Representative Jason Crow listened to during a classified briefing last summer, while a top intelligence official said that Russia was hurting Joe Biden's campaign to help President Donald Trump. Weird. Mr. Crow, Democrat of Colorado, held up an intelligence agency news release from days earlier and demanded to know why they hadn't hanged Donald Trump. No, but rather demanded to know why it said nothing about Russia's plans. When are you going to come out publicly and correct this record? Mr. Crow recalled asking the official, William R. Evanina. Because there's a massive disconnect between what is in your news releases and what you're saying publicly because of the pressure of the president. In fact, the pressure by the president is probably what he should have said, but that's probably what he meant. A report released Tuesday made clear that the intelligence community believed that Russia had long attacked Mr. Biden for the benefit of Mr. Trump, but throughout 2020, senior officials bowed to Trump's hostility toward any public emphasis of the threat from Russia, and they offered Congress and the public incomplete or misleading portraits of the intelligence on foreign influence in the election. The picture is complicated. While Mr. Trump's enmity toward the intelligence community loomed, because they had him dead to rights as a spy, because that's their jobs, and he is stupid and is terrible at covering his tracks, and they had him dead to rights, While Mr. Trump's enmity toward the intelligence community loomed and his political appointees emphasized the threat from China and Iran, not Russia, career officers did also get key findings about Russian intelligence declassified and disclosed last year. Soon after that briefing to Congress, Mr. Evanina released details about Kremlin-backed operatives denigrating Biden, fulfilling the demands of Mr. Crow and other lawmakers. In an interview, Mr. Evanina credited Congress for pushing for more information, but said it took time and effort to get other intelligence officials to declassify the information. Once made public, the information broke new ground in describing Russian activity, but it also angered the White House because they had been caught. We were out there on our island, Mr. Evanina said. The White House was unhappy with us, and so were the Democrats. After Mr. Evanina's disclosure, Trump and other senior administration officials worked to play down the intelligence about Russian interference, just as they did in the fantastic film No Way Out, but he wasn't president. But they worked to play down intelligence information about their guilt. That's what they do. And, of course, to redirect focus to China's work, which, by the way, now I recall as when Justice was tweeting this around and saying, well, I had the tweets available. Trump is well, you'll never believe it. Trump is a traitor and the GOP are Vichy Nazis. Well, he doesn't hide the way he feels about those things. Nor should he. I just thought that was interesting. And my comment offhand at the time was, it's weird that he then went on to kill 575,000 and counting Americans. And, we all like, well, gosh, nothing you can do about disease. It's not really his fault or whatever. It's just that as president of the United States, he curiously and mysteriously opted personally to redirect the whole of government efforts in exactly the wrong direction, such that many hundreds of thousands of these deaths which were unnecessary, happened anyway. It's just odd that it nearly destroyed America, to the advantage of, let's say, our international enemies with whom he had this weird ongoing relationship. I thought that was kind of interesting to note. But, and then tried to overthrow the government right when he lost the election. So there's also that. But, other than that, it was also weird that he then further went on to blame those 575,000 now plus deaths on China, just out of all the countries in the world that it could have been blamed on. And I mean, it was, I'm sure to him, the luckiest stroke in the world that the virus actually was first detected in China, so that he would have plausible reason for blaming them for this other weird, maybe intelligence operation, maybe not, that he pulled off that, murdered hundreds of thousands. Anyway, back to the other story. Right, Evanina's disclosure and other people's working on trying to clarify things. What do we learn from it? Their efforts allowed Americans to dismiss... Oh, I'm sorry. Now we're talking about Trump and the obfuscation efforts. Those efforts allowed Americans to dismiss a widely accepted intelligence assessment as mere politics, deepening distrust and division among the electorate and then allowing them to try to overthrow the government and think they were doing a good thing, right? This is, the assessment of current and former officials, adding that a divided country was vulnerable to foreign interference. So all in keeping with the Russian plan from start to finish. We're so polarized, Mr. Evanina said, we're going to be even more susceptible this kind of activity moving forward. Former Trump administration officials defended their public assessments of the intelligence. Some administration officials saw intelligence analysts, particularly the CIA's Russia experts, as presenting an overly dramatic analysis of the Kremlin's intentions. The newly released report, former Trump administration officials argued, blurs the definitions of influence and interference. By the way, I guess I'll comment before we get too far off of this statement. I could see some validity to this too, right? Some administration officials saw intelligence analysts, particularly the CIA's Russia experts, as presenting an overly dramatic analysis of the Kremlin's intentions. It is their job, of course, to get hyperbolic about what the Kremlin, whatever that even means anymore, might be up to. So I'm open to that possibility. But yeah, well, the mounting evidence that continues to mount even in the form of Trump administration officials interfering in the open analysis and discussion of what they're actually finding, that too is evidence in itself. I mean, it's one of the unfortunate situations you'll find yourself in, but then be aware of that and play it, with a light hand, and you'll be able to get away with it. But instead, they went in with a heavy hand, and it looked bad. The newly released report, former Trump administration officials argued, blurs the definitions between influence and interference. Russia's effort was always more about spreading information and propaganda, the former official said, and there was no evidence that the Kremlin changed votes, the report's definition of interference. There is zero evidence, said Richard Grenell, who really belongs in prison, the former acting director of national intelligence, who himself is essentially a Russian operative, and we shouldn't have been putting him in charge of national intelligence. The key judgment number one is that no one interfered. This is influence versus interference. But if that's the case, if there's any validity to that, it's just that it's a bad definition of interference, and they should change it. Throughout 2020, current and former intelligence officials privately expressed concern about how the White House characterized intelligence. Inside the intelligence agencies, officers continued to develop classified information on Russian interference and worked to present it honestly. For example, the designated election security czar, Shelby Pearson, maybe we should stop calling them czars, was consistent in how she portrayed Russian actions in briefings to Congress, according to people familiar with her testimony. But one of her briefings, in which Ms. Pearson told lawmakers Russia favored Trump and was working for his re-election, that prompted outrage among Republicans and contributed to the ousting of Joseph R. Maguire as the acting director of national intelligence. Mr. Evanina was then put in charge of briefing Congress, a role he was abruptly thrust into with little preparation, all officials said. But also, certainly with the preparation that the previous guy got fired for telling Republicans the truth about the relationship between Trump and the Russians. And yeah, they were working for his re-election. You'll recall that we knew since the June 2016, or since the revelations anyway, of the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting that kicked most of this stuff off, even though it didn't get brought up in his first impeachment trial. The message was the Russians want to meet with you to talk about their program to help you in the election. Oh, really? All right. Well, if it's what I think it is, I love it. You remember that answer. All right. For Mr. Evanina's first meeting with lawmakers on election security last March, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, then run by Grenell, prepared a document that tried to temper Pearson's February warning by cautioning that officials had not concluded that Russia was backing Mr. Trump. But they had. The IC has not concluded that the Kremlin is directly aiding any candidate's re-election or any other candidate's election. An unclassified summary given to lawmakers said. Once again, they're writing unclassified summaries of classified documents that say the opposite of what the documents actually say and think they can get away with it because the documents are classified and people won't find out. Well, anyway, let's see. This was, of course, the unclassified summary given to lawmakers using shorthand for the intelligence community. That's IC. Nor have we concluded that the Russians will definitely choose to try to do so in 2020, but they already had. Grenell privately pushed intelligence officials to provide evidence. Find me the evidence. Find me the votes. Do me a favor. To back up their conclusion that Russian disinformation activity was about influencing the elections rather than simply an effort to stoke divisive debates in the United States. He has in the past defended the March briefing as an accurate summary of the intelligence, but the intelligence community ombudsman said in January that there were substantive differences between talking points for briefing Congress and what the intelligence community really thought. The newly declassified report showed that the March briefing was at best misleading to Congress. That's at best. And backed Ms. Pearson's February testimony. The report laid out how the Russian strategy of attacking Biden goes back to 2014, before Trump was a serious candidate for office. While some senior intelligence officials have suggested that Russia, or intelligence on Russia, was in flux at various points in 2020, the new report made clear that the intelligence community's view on Putin's support for Trump was little changed from 2016, when they had that meeting and said, "We support you," and 2020. Senior Trump administration officials' comments about China were also at odds with the report. John Ratcliffe, remember that guy? Trump's final director of national intelligence, said publicly before and after the election that China was the greatest national security threat. In a letter to Congress, he said the intelligence community was not applying the same definition to Chinese influence operations as it was to Russia's. Some intelligence officials defended Ratcliffe's comments on China, noting that Beijing was the most serious long-term threat to the United States, and that it clearly tried to influence how it was viewed in America and elsewhere. The January Ombudsman report did find merit in Ratcliffe's critique of how intelligence on Chinese influence operations was handled. Grinnell said his successor was right to focus on China and that it was wrong to dismiss his critique of the intelligence agencies because analysts use different standards when looking at China's influence operations compared with Russia's. China is a crisis, Grinnell said. Russia is a problem. Okay. Still, in appearances on Fox News, Ratcliffe's relentless focus on China rather than on Russia had the effect of leaving the impression, particularly with the president's most enthusiastic supporters, that China was the most urgent threat in the 2020 election. The new report rejected that assertion. Trying to equate or at times suggest that China was actually more actively interfering than Russia just wasn't true, said Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat of California and the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. I certainly tried to call them out on it at the time, but wasn't able to hold up the classified intelligence document to show how misleading they had been. But I think this report makes it very clear. Even if China is a long-term national security threat, Russia will continue to be the larger threat for the next few elections, Evanina said. There's some political speak about China being a bigger, more existential threat. Sure they are, but not when it comes to the elections. And so once again, we see one of those structural problems that classified intelligence presents. And classified intelligence crossed with an administration willing to just simply lie and say whatever the hell they want and know that they can depend on the classification of the document to prevent anyone from showing that they're wrong. They can accuse them of being wrong, but they can't show it. Here's Adam Schiff with the actual report in his hand, sitting there saying, your summary of the report is backwards from what's really in the report. Oh, yeah? Prove it. Well, I actually can't because I'm not allowed to. I mean, I could. It's here. This is the proof, but I'm not allowed to show anybody this proof. It's a problem. We might have to figure out how to deal with that. Anyway, all right. Let's see. That's a hell of a story all by itself, really, to be quite honest. Let's see. I don't know how you even follow this up, but there's a lot more out there and worth discussing. How do we follow up this strange story? I don't know. Here's one. I guess this is the story I put aside, and it just didn't look right in Pocket. But TPM was, I guess, where I put the initial story on the new report. New sanctions on Manafort's deputies suggest deeper role of Russian intel in 2016. And there's this interesting group photo being used to illustrate this. And I saw this photo circulated separately because the lineup of people in the photo. This is Konstantin, the caption here of this group photo. Konstantin Kilimnik, an elusive figure under indictment for alleged witness tampering by special counsel Robert Mueller, is seen seated on the far left in a March 2006 photo obtained by the Associated Press as part of a collection of internal corporate memos and business records from the international political consulting offices of Donald Trump's ex-campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. Mueller has indicated that Kilimnik is in Russia and has ties to Russian intelligence, which Kilimnik disputes. The photograph represents one of the few images known to exist of Kilimnik. Also in the photo, seated from left, are Kilimnik, Martha Young, Catherine Barnes, and then tad divine, which I think is what got people's attention. And they said, that seems odd because he was a top advisor to Bernie Sanders. And what's going on here? And why is he in a photograph seated next to Paul Manafort doing political consulting? And I guess the answer is that it's taking place in Ukraine, and the thought is supposed to be that it's sort of kind of maybe nonpartisan. We're sort of the idea probably on the surface was we're teaching them about democracy and how to build democracy in an emerging democratic nation. So, the people would be there from, quote unquote, both sides in the United States makes some sense, but it's a little disconcerting. And of course it was being used by maybe even properly used by people who are still in the business of being angry about Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign, and I can't stop them, but there it is. I thought that was an interesting choice. I guess it was chosen because Kalimnik is actually in the photo, although he looks like he's 12 years old in this photo. But it was interesting. There's some deeper meaning to it. What does the TPM stuff have to say? I don't think there's anything that goes beyond what we would already have learned from the two pieces that we read. But I thought the photo was interesting, so I wanted to bring that up, even though maybe Sanders fans will be mad about my having done that. But you can call the radio station and complain, I guess. Tell Justice you're upset. All right. Let's see. Other stories that I wanted to bring up. Oh, yes. I guess the tweet that originally brought that story to mind, I also parked just for its commentary here. Zeddery, perhaps you follow along on Twitter. I don't actually know what his background is because he's one of those guys that doesn't put anything in his profile. But perhaps you follow him on Twitter as well. Just pointing out, Manafort pleaded guilty to conspiring with Kalimnik to coach witnesses at his trial. Trump pardoned him of that crime. Collusion was real, full stop. Just thought I would point that out because I thought that was a pretty good point as well. So thanks to Zeddery for pointing that out in case you missed the overarching theme of these two stories. All right, let's see. Other things that we have to explore today. We just kind of have to shift gears, and we're coming up on the next break, so we'll have to continue on the other side of this one. But let's see. Why not see if we can throw this in? Because there was a relatively short notes. One was that, to no one's surprise once we get through the story, Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, for various and sundry, as Greg would say, stupid reasons, and we're not sure what they are, found themselves as the only two members of the entire House of Representatives who were present and voting. This according to the tweet from Manu Raju from CNN. The lone two members to vote against a bill, probably yesterday, that would reauthorize the National Marrow Donor Program, which of course matches bone marrow donors and cord blood units with patients who have leukemia and other diseases. The bill otherwise passed the House 415 to 2, but just in case you were wondering where these two are, like legislatively, substantively, I guess they're working overtime today to try to come up with explanations for why they would do it, but it's just, they vote no on everything. And, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene would have had no opportunity at any point to study the bill with a committee or anything like that, but that's her own fault. And, what was I going to tell you? These two clowns, so pre-programmed that they would do that. They didn't even look around and notice, what are other people doing? Are the most serious Trump fans in the House among Republicans not voting in favor of this thing? I have no idea whether they had any interest in or any knowledge of what the bill was actually about. It was a bill. It was being brought to the floor by Democrats. The answer is no. And, tomorrow, of course, we'll find out that, 10 people in their families used the National Marrow Donor Program to fight their own leukemia. And I suppose you could take this back to their district and say Marjorie Taylor Greene is such a clown and a performance artist that she voted against reauthorizing the National Marrow Donor Program. And thousands of you here in her district benefited from that and could not have survived your bout with leukemia, or your children couldn't have survived their bout with leukemia unless there was such a program. But she says no to that. And, whatever. At the end, they'll say, but she owns the libs. So there you have it. And we'll see whether any of that works. Another odd observation, just one that we can fit in here before we depart for the break. Sarah Ferris, Politico reporter, tweeting this morning in her contribution to the Morning Huddle column. There was some talk back in January that the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, right, would basically be booted from the party, or at least have a very difficult time of seeking re-election with party support. Well, FEC filings, she said, show they did just fine, with half of them bringing in more than $500,000. Yes, in the first quarter of an off year. So pretty interesting, I guess. I guess it's supposed to, I don't know what to make of it. I don't really want any of them to win. I don't think it does us any good to have Republicans who were willing to vote for a failed impeachment necessarily, but okay. Well, anyway, they are doing just fine. Liz Cheney tops the list with $1.5 million. Adam Kinzinger with $1.1 million. Jamie Herrera Butler, $744,755. And it goes on from there. We'll name the rest of them in case you're interested after this short break. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll continue by, we'll give you that list of Republicans who voted for impeachment and then did just fine in their fundraising, which as a Democrat, it's difficult to know what to think of it exactly, but put it this way, it doesn't make a difference what Republicans do. They get lots of money and they roll forward. I guess it's a blow to Republicans who thought that they would own somebody, I guess, by saying that anybody who voted for the impeachment of Trump would be utterly destroyed and their fundraising would dry up. Well, it didn't. So Liz Cheney tops the list at $1.5 million. And then the number 10 on the list here, who in terms of fundraising prowess between voting for Trump's impeachment and now, the last on the list is Dan Newhouse, who raised a mere $289,493 in the first quarter of a non-election year, just to sort of put that in perspective. So everything from nearly $300,000 up to $1.5 million for Liz Cheney. So in order, it was Cheney, Kinzinger, Butler, spelled Beutler, but I think she goes with the anglicized Butler, right? Next up was Representative Anthony Gonzalez, $616,000. I'll leave off the hundreds places underneath that. That's chump change, $100, right? Number 5 was Peter. Do we decide he was pronouncing it Meyer, Meijer? Somebody actually gave me the pronunciation of that a while ago, and then I thought, I'll never call this guy's name again. So what's the difference? $519,000. John Katko, $436,000. Tom Rice with $404,000. Fred Upton, who you'd think would be up higher in all of this, but he's such a low-key guy, $360,000. And then David Valadao, I hope I got that right. Well, I don't know. If you're writing him a check, you can worry about it. $321,000. And then Dan Newhouse with his piddling $289,000 in the first quarter of the year. All right. Worth noting. Glad we got that taken care of. Let's see. We can shift gears a little bit here. Once again, there are a couple of things I want to throw in there. And I guess maybe I let too much time pass between the openings opening comments on the latest shootings, including the police shooting. But I have some news on that front, too, which will give me a chance to take a little break, too, right? Our good friend Darwin Darko has sent us another great contribution, and this one on a story I had missed up to now. Maybe why don't we do that? That way we can guarantee we get that in. Now we've segued to it, right? We'd just be shifting gears in other ways if we moved away from it. But a story that I had otherwise neglected to include in the roundup, and I'm pretty sure I had parked a story on it somewhere because it was kind of an incredible thing. I had not heard the story, and it's an old story, but now we can have Darwin tell it, and in many ways it's probably best that he does it. And boy, does he put it. I listened to the piece, editing it, putting it together for air, just cleaning it up a little bit here and there so that the presentation comes across as crisply as possible. And it's a good one, but he really, he pulls one out in this. This is the story of the black police officer, black woman who was an officer in Buffalo, New York, who actually, did the right thing when confronted with police brutality. She said, this isn't the way cops should handle themselves, and put a stop to it. And guess what they did to her? Yeah. Well, anyway, now she's won a victory in court. Very important one. And here I will let Darwin take it away. And not only that, I can tell you, he'll tell you where he found the article and why he found it there. All of this is very clever in many ways. But I had this story, and it really should have been discussed already. So let's just let Darwin patch that hole for us.
Hello, David. Hello, KITM family. Thanks for giving me a chance to join you today. I am actually wearing a different hat. I'm not reporting on anything military related. Today, you can refer to me as your senior black correspondent, as I'm reporting on this former cop who was finally vindicated by the courts in New York. This was written in the New York Times, but I don't have a subscription, so I'm actually reading a copy from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Her name is Carrie O'Horn. So she was a black cop. She was fired for stopping a chokehold by a fellow officer. The article starts, it was a cold November day in Buffalo, New York 15 years ago when Officer Carrie O'Horn responded to a call for a colleague in need of help. What she encountered was a white officer who appeared to be in a rage, punching a handcuffed black man in the face repeatedly as other officers stood by. I'm going to put a pin on that in right there. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. Horn, who is black, by the way, heard the handcuffed man say he could not breathe and saw the white officer put him in chokehold. At that point, court documents show she forcibly removed the white officer and began to trade blows with him. In the altercation's aftermath, Horn was reassigned, hit with departmental charges, and eventually fired just 1 year short of the 20 years on the force she needed to collect her full pension. She tried and failed more than once to have the decision reversed as unfair. On Tuesday, however, in an outcome explicitly informed by the police killing of George Floyd, a state court judge vacated an earlier ruling that affirmed her firing, essentially rewriting the end of her police career and granting her the back pay and benefits she had previously been denied. You go, girl. The legal system can, at the very least, be a mechanism to help justice prevail, even if belatedly, the judge, Justice Dennis Ward, wrote. His ruling also invoked the death of Floyd and Eric Gardner. Eric Gardner was another black man who died in Staten Island with those famous last words, "I can't breathe," which has become a national rallying cry against police brutality. The time is always right to do right, added Ward of the state Supreme Court in Erie County, quoting Martin Luther King. In a statement, Horn, she's now 53, celebrated the decision. My vindication comes at a 15-year cost, but what has been gained could not be measured, she said. I never wanted another police officer to go through what I had gone through for doing the right thing. A lawyer for the white officer, Gregory Kwiatkowski, did not respond to a request for comment. A spokesperson for Buffalo's Mayor Brian Brown said the city had always supported any additional judicial review available to Officer Horn and respects the court's decision. In 2006, encounter that led to Horn's firing began as a dispute between a woman and a former boyfriend whom she had accused of stealing her social security check. When the officer tried to arrest a former boyfriend, the situation turned violent. Horn said she saw Kwiatkowski put the man in a chokehold. Kwiatkowski. This guy, okay, so this is spelled Kwiatkowski. That's a lot of, it's a lot of strategically placed K's there. So it's spelled Kwiatkowski. 3 K's too many for my taste. I'll go on. So they saw him, he grabbed him around the neck and shoulders in a bear hug, headlock from behind, according to court documents. In KKK's telling, Horn struck him in the face, pulled him backward by his collar, and jumped on him. An internal investigation cleared KKK of all charges. Horn was offered a 4-day suspension, which she turned down. After hearings in 2007-2008, the police department found that her use of physical force against a fellow officer had not been justified. She was fired in May 2008. Kwiatkowski was promoted to lieutenant the same year. The article goes on. This is freaking infuriating. But alas, justice is slow, but, fair eventually at the end. So here's what I wanted to put a pin in, the whole thing about officers standing by. When we look at the George Floyd situation, the George Floyd murder, several officers were standing by. This person's life could have been saved if when they talk about bad apples and they said, oh, the bad apples are rare and vast majority of officers are good. If you are standing by, you are a bad apple. Inaction makes you a bad apple. Inaction allows these situations to reoccur, and they will continue to keep happening because good quote unquote officers are standing by and not preventing these bad apples from taking these bad actions. These bad apples don't have an incentive to not continue their rage or their misplaced aggression of whatever power trip they're on at the time when they encounter the citizenry. Here's what I say. If we want to give them an incentive, it looks like, as I'm reading this article, apparently these police officers' pensions are not untouchable. Look what they did to Ms. Horn. They touched her pension. It's been 15 years. She wasn't able to get her full pension, 1 year away from retirement. So guess what? That means the pension, the police pension, is on the table for retribution, right? So here's what I say. Here's my theory of the case and how we can help alleviate some of these cases. When officers are found culpable, okay, they go to court. Sometimes they don't even get charged. Maybe they get charged, they get acquitted. Okay, fine. Well, that's a whole separate conversation. But what I'm talking about right now is those civil cases where the city or the county pays out millions of dollars to the family of the victim. That comes from tax dollars. No, what I think should happen is that should come from the police fund, the police pension fund. Apparently, we just have a case here. The pension is not out of bounds. So these officers that are standing by will now risk their entire pension fund losing millions of dollars because this one officer, they refuse to check this one officer who is blatantly out of line. You ain't gonna mess with my pension. This is my retirement. I got 15 years in the game. I got 20 years in the game. And you doing this action, you are clearly out of bounds. I'm not just gonna stand by and watch you do this because you are affecting me now and my family and my retirement. You will no longer have cops just standing by. For good cops to stand out and for bad cops to be rooted out, good cops need to be proactive. And if we need to give them an incentive to be proactive, we could say, well, you know what? We're going to hang your pension fund over your head, your retirement over your head for you to not just be a bystander. In George Floyd's case, there were several officers that were just standing by that could have just tapped Chauvin on the shoulder. Hey, buddy, yo, chill. Come, hey, yo, look what you're doing. He says can't breathe. All right, yo, relax. We got him. It's 5 of us here. We got him. But no, that's not what happened. People stood by. Carrie O'Horn here, she did the right thing and she was punished for it. She was vilified for it. And that's not the way we will ever correct policing in America. So I'm glad she finally got her vindication, and this needs to be precedent. Matter of fact, these officers that are testifying against Chauvin in these cases, you never see officers testifying against other officers, especially their chiefs. They're there to protect them. They're testifying against Chauvin because they're saying this is not representing us. We need to make examples of these people that don't belong on the force, that don't deserve that badge. We need to root them out. And if you really want to regain and build trust in the community, that's how you do it. You don't punish cops who are whistleblowers. You don't punish cops who stop excessive force. You promote them. They ended up promoting this guy after the fact. But she was fired and took 15 years to gain what she earned for nearly 20 years on the force. So that's my take on it. I'm glad for her. And I need more examples like this. And I don't need it to just be black cops that are stopping white cops from doing it. I need white cops to stop other white cops. Racism is a white people problem. I need white people to step up and check other white people. And she wouldn't have to be trading blows with a grown man. Granted, she's a police officer. She'd probably handle herself. But that's my take. So hopefully I added something to the conversation, and maybe somebody can signal boost this and we can get some maybe legislative change from the state level to the federal level. Who knows? But put the pension on the table. The whole pension fund, not the single officer, but the entire force's pension fund on the table. That way they will check each other. So this is Darwin Darko. I've been your senior black correspondent today. Back to you, David.
Wow. So, yeah, several fantastic points made there. And by the way, I mean, it's crazy situation, but I'm just about lost it when he was explaining how, well, okay, from now on, if we can't pronounce the name necessarily, which I make out too, the same thing as Kwiatkowski, I guess, right? But I don't know that I would have picked up necessarily on the K's, and the placement of the K's was a good eye for Darwin on that one. Holy cow. And then I like that you just went with it. All right, well, we'll just call the cop KKK from here on in. Sure, why not? You're entitled to do it. And what a moment that was. But also a great point here. Well, there's a lot of great points, and there's a great story in all this. And it occurs to me as he's reading it, I'm thinking about it again, that it took her nearly as long to vindicate herself, this police officer did. It took her 15 years to vindicate her position, which came in a battle after 20 years on the force. It took her nearly as long to correct this error that cost her pension as it did to earn that pension, which by itself is pretty remarkable. So for 15 years, I mean, I hope that they're taking this into account, and then if I guess maybe they'll have to forget about the procedural posture of the case, but they might have to remand this for some sort of different decision, or maybe even retrial on all of this. But I hope somewhere somebody is capable of doing the math and saying, well, not only what needs to be restored here is not only the pension, but 15 years worth of interest on that pension too. Not to mention, I think probably some punitive damages ought to be awarded in this as well. So anyway, another great spot. And I don't think there was anything really that focused on it in this article. It was all Darwin's insight to this. How many times have we seen this, that the pension was supposedly untouchable, and there's only so much you can do in punishing these officers, and yes, you can fire him, but he's still going to get his pension, etc. And it was always under the guise of it being untouchable, which, to a certain extent grows out of progressive principle, right? I mean, the idea of stealing away people's retirement, even when they have done wrong. I mean, unless you can prove that the entirety of their service on the police force was criminal in nature, there's no reason really to reach to that pension. Good enough really to get them off the force and hold them up as an example. But it is odd that when a black woman police officer intervenes and stops a white male police officer from doing wrong and then is punished for it, on top of that, what do you know? The pension can be yanked after all. So as long as pensions are on the table for some officers, they maybe ought to be on the table for all officers. Now, another idea that he floats there, interesting in terms of motivating good cops who insist that they're out there to stand up to bad cops, which they insist is what should normally happen. And if you'll just give us a chance, maybe they would be motivated by the loss of pension funds, not only their own, but the entirety of the police pension fund. The whole force's fund is in jeopardy anytime any one of you is held liable and subject to judgment. I mean, it makes more sense than having the taxpayers in general pay that. Worth exploring. I'd be open to the possibility that it still comes to an unjust result, but I'd like to hear the argument for it, because I enjoyed hearing Darwin's argument for his position too, and it's a damn good point. And at the very least, we would, I guess, then be able to demand an answer for how is it that you were so easily able to step in and prohibit Officer Horn's pension from being delivered when we were always told that this was just beyond our reach. Good catch. Great story, great take, great catch, something interesting to carry forward. Since I have a feeling we're going to be back on this police reform topic, maybe a little bit in the near future. So, all right. Well, thanks very much for chiming in, and thanks very much as well for saving me the 10 minutes. It gave me a nice break, and I was pleased to do it. All right. We have to change directions again because there's no continuing in this direction. I have nothing more to add to this read. There's a couple other pieces here that I thought would make good weekend information so that you can stay in your house and tell no one about it, or Zoom with people if you're still awaiting your vaccination. Let's see. How about this one? This seemed like a good... I like the title and the thrust of the piece here. An opinion piece from Catherine Rampell, columnist at the Washington Post. An opinion piece that's running under the headline of Republicans desperate to oppose Biden's jobs plan settle on a nonsense reason. That's a reasonable thing for them to do, right? We have no good argument. How about a bad one? Republican lawmakers have been casting about for reasons to oppose President Biden's infrastructure plan, even though it looks an awful lot like initiatives they've supported in the past. Initially, they complained about a too expensive definition of infrastructure, but that didn't seem to stick. Attacking the actual contents of the plan has been tricky too, since both the overall proposal and its individual components are popular among constituents. Aggressively opposing Biden's proposed investments in broadband or the electric grid or even elder care could easily backfire. So, desperate Republicans have turned to their old standby, the last refuge of scoundrels, fear-mongering about taxes. Biden's proposal is paid for in part through a modest increase in corporate taxes. Whatever else might end up in the bill, Republicans say opposition to this provision is their non-negotiable red line, which really honestly is about as stupid as the idea of let's also attack baseball. The idea that corporate taxes are where American individuals are, ready to lay down their lives. I have no idea where they came up with this one. Unfortunately for Republicans, corporate tax increases also turn out to be phenomenally popular. For many years, Americans have believed that big companies haven't been paying their, quote, fair share. Of course, just because something polls well doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea, so Republicans are trying to argue this narrative to the public. The 2017 GOP tax overhaul that lowered the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21% has been an extraordinary success, leading to gangbusters economic growth, hiring, and strong government revenue. Therefore, they claim, partly reversing this policy by bringing the corporate rate to 28%, as Biden proposes, would be an economic death sentence. And reminder here that we have read through a number of times the 60 years of Republican rhetoric document that says that they always oppose Democratic initiatives and predict Democratic doom. And chiefly, they've been wrong about it, and wrong in spectacular ways. Like the economy has actually gone into another boom cycle in many of these instances when they said, no. What the actual economics show is that this will be a disaster. So keep that in mind. This argument has a few problems. Among them, even one of the architects of then President Donald Trump's tax cuts, former National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn, acknowledged its nonsense. On the corporate tax rate, I'm actually okay at 28%, he said in an interview last year when asked about then-candidate Biden's proposal. The level we got to in our tax plan on the corporate side was actually a little bit lower than I thought we needed to go. He said the corporate community would likely be fine with that level too, and that business groups told the Trump administration as much during private discussions in 2017. The corporate sector's public posture, of course, differs now. There are some interesting echoes here of the 1980s. When President Ronald Reagan signed a massive tax cut into law in 1981, his own Office of Management and Budget Director publicly expressed misgivings about the size and implications for the deficit. Over the next few years, in response to the ballooning deficits his staffers had correctly predicted, Reagan signed into law multiple major tax increases. That partial clawback is a fact today's Republicans conveniently forget. But the bigger problem for Republicans today is that the track record of the Trump tax cuts has been a bust. That's according to standards set by the law's own advocates. Back in 2017, the law's boosters offered a very specific explanation for how the corporate tax cuts would provide, quote, rocket fuel for the U.S. economy. Reducing taxes on corporate profits would, you know the argument, attract more capital, they argued, which would in turn increase business investment, which would lead to growth in economic activity, hiring, and wages. Through additional economic growth, this entire law would, quote, pay for itself. In reality, the law has no appreciable effect on business investment. As a 2019 International Monetary Fund analysis found, growth in gross domestic product was also not terribly different, and in the post-tax cut and pre-COVID years than in several years prior. Tax revenue was also much lower than had been forecast to be the case without the cuts, meaning that no, the law did not pay for itself. It's true the job market was strong-ish, I would say, in the period after the tax cuts passed and before COVID-19 broke out, and that unemployment was very low, but unemployment had already been falling for 8 years before the Trump tax cuts. That existing trend merely continued. And again, the specific capital deepening, that's in quotes, capital deepening mechanism by which the law was supposed to create an economic bonanza never happened. Those of us who had been skeptical of the rosy predictions Republicans made in 2017 pointed out that whatever might be holding back business investment, it didn't seem like a lack of capital was behind it, I guess. A lack of access to capital. Anyway, at the time, companies were already sitting on mountains of cash, yes, that they couldn't find productive investments for. The tax cuts seemed more likely instead to result in a windfall for shareholders. That forecast did materialize in the form of the stock buyback boom. Although now I'm thinking, I know that Joan in particular has been on our air a particular critic of the stock buyback movement, and there are good reasons for doing it. Now I was thinking, as I read this about them sitting on mountains of cash and what we learned about modern monetary theory from Arliss Bunny and others, actually maybe that would be more inflationary than anything else, a real-world block to turning these mountains of cash into real-world productivity. It just wasn't happening. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Did I make that point clearly enough as we were exiting out for the break? I wondered about I'll have to check with a real economist on that, about does it end up being an inflationary impact? I guess it could lead to inflationary activity, I guess, if you got companies sitting on mountains of cash that they can't find productive investments for, and they simply start essentially dispersing it to themselves and saying, well, we can't find an effective investment for it. Maybe the stock buyback is actually a mechanism that runs toward that, and just enriching corporate officers who then go out and say, well, we couldn't find an effective investment for it at the corporate level, so we gave it to ourselves, and then we'll buy a bunch of yachts with it, and our additional spending without constraint, because we just have money to burn, might be the more inflationary problem than, let's say, minting money and using it for public investment in infrastructure. But yeah, I guess that raises a certain question about what happens. Certainly there's got to be something wrong with it. It would be an area of concern for economists if corporations are sitting on mountains of cash and can't find anything to do with it. There's no way for us to turn this into more cash, which is the whole idea of capitalism. And things are going wrong here. There's nowhere we can spend it to help us get, turn it into more. That's an odd problem. Anyway, so to continue with the piece, there's just one more line. I should have fit that in instead. Given this track record, Republican warnings about economic apocalypse that could ensue from a reasonable tax increase are not terribly convincing. Plus, of course, that 60-year history we've gone over before. But since tax cuts are the only thing Republicans still reliably stand for, it's hard to blame them for trying. It's not hard at all. I absolutely blame them for trying. The only thing that they have left that they stand for is something stupid that never made any sense and was a lie from the beginning. It's just one of several of their big lies. And we're focusing on some of the more dangerous ones at the moment. But the idea that tax cuts will create more investment in jobs and that'll create more jobs for people seeking them has always been a lie. And the fact that it's the basis of our economy, or at least economic policy, is an ongoing problem that needs to be addressed. Okay, we can redefine some other interesting subjects that tend to drive our politics. Although I thought this might be something, well, I wouldn't be surprised to see it return on Monday when Greg rejoins us. So maybe I could give you a hint about it and spend less time on it, but give you something to think about over the weekend, and give, or if Greg's listening, I'll give you this introduction to the subject, which you probably already have parked in your own read it later piece or your cue for discussion on Monday. But if not, or if you're not listening, the rest of us can take bets on whether or not we think this will show up on Monday in the Cook Political Report, where you get lots of your information. From Amy Walter, where you get lots of your information. A subject that we've spent lots of time discussing, redefining swing voters. We'll give you a teaser, at the very least, of how this goes with the first paragraph. Every election comes with its own branded swing voter. In the 1990s and early 2000s, we had soccer moms and NASCAR dads, as well as security moms and office park dads. Over the last 4 years, the typical swing voter was either defined as an upscale suburban resident, Peloton moms, I don't know if anybody tried to use that or she's floating that, or a white working class voter in small town America. But these groups all share one thing in common: race. The working assumption in modern politics is that the more diverse the electorate, the better for Democrats, and the whiter the electorate, the better for Republicans. So now I'm really intrigued and I want to go on. But I'm thinking maybe we save this thing. I'll give you the article. You can read it over the weekend so you can be fully prepared if Greg goes this direction on Monday or Wednesday or Thursday. But if he doesn't, maybe we can return to it. It's not a hot burning issue that you'll, and certainly not something you haven't heard about before. But because we've spoken about it so often, and now Amy Walters weighing in on it, I thought that might be of some interest. But that would give us, if we wait on it, could give us some time to address some other interesting topics. Like, how about the coronavirus? I've been wondering about this. Have you heard about this thing? Greg will certainly be discussing the virus and the latest news as well. But it's been a while since we read through Greg Sargent's work, and it's always so good. And I always feel like we're on the same page, and sometimes I feel like, this is my patting myself on the back. I feel like we've covered the same subjects in many ways, and done it in similar fashion, so that reading Greg Sargent's pieces about it just seems like self-selecting items to reinforce what I've already told you. So it seems a little bit unfair. But here's one where he beats me to the punch. I've been wondering about this. And so again, the fact that we're in the same page, at least initially, doesn't surprise me. But of course, I've been speculating beyond all responsibility about this, and you'll see what I mean, I guess, if we read through this piece. His column this time: a coronavirus-infected Republicans' anger at Trump signals turbulence ahead. And that's not necessarily the direction I've been thinking about with coronavirus-infected Republicans and their anger, but I have been thinking about it a lot. And I was just wondering yesterday, with the numbers in terms of vaccine, I don't even want to call it vaccine hesitancy. It's basically vaccine denialism now among people who still self-identify as Republicans. I've been wondering about, what does the virus do in this situation? The virus does what it does, but it's not out of line entirely to think of it as almost an intelligent being. It's not, but I think it's not. Don't tell anybody. If it is intelligent, I don't want it to hear that I think it's unintelligent. I've got vaccinated and everything, but there's still a 5% chance you could find a way to get me. Don't tell. But anyway, I was wondering about what's the virus's path forward in a situation where one particular segment of the population believes in and seeks out and gets the vaccinations, and another segment avoids it for whatever reasons, but chiefly political in this case, is what I'm concerned about. Does the virus say to itself, self, I says, virus, where can I take my protein spike next for my next meal? Essentially, I guess the question is, the virus can, of course, mutate, and as a natural imperative, does mutate, especially when it runs up against a barrier like vaccination. How can I, it's imperative, it's categorical imperative, if you want to give it agency as a philosophical actor, is, of course, to reproduce. And it will want to do that. And the natural forces will direct it, if it's possible, around the barrier of vaccination. But is that imperative as strong as it would be if the vaccine were in fact being more widely distributed. If we really could achieve herd immunity such that we could at least reduce this to non-pandemic levels, and we wouldn't be able to necessarily wipe it out, but we could reduce it to non-pandemic levels. And the energy of the virus that would all otherwise put into, sort of, in a manner of speaking. I know it doesn't really do these things, but the energy spent on trying to get around the barrier of vaccination, it can spare itself the effort. There's plenty of low-hanging fruit still out there, and it could still go I mean, if 45% of registered Republicans or whatever, self-confessed, I guess we can now say, Republicans are still saying they will never get the vaccine and are really meaning it. They're not just lying, trying to own the libs by making them angry by answering pollsters this way, or lying about whether or not they've gotten the vaccination, as I would believe, say, someone like Tucker Carlson might do, and they're out there unvaccinated, then the virus has no clear imperative to necessarily mutate to get around the barrier of the vaccine when it can just eat as many Republicans as it wants. I'm wondering whether that's even a thing, a way of describing the behavior of the virus that makes any sense. I mean, I know it's not intelligent, it's not making decisions about where it spends its energy, but I think just the natural forces at work behind its attempts at reproduction lead to this. And it can be described after the fact as practically intelligent, if not actually intelligent. But 45% of registered Republicans, I mean, that leaves millions and millions, tens and hundreds of millions of people left to infect out there that will have no protection from the more serious outcomes that come along with it. And I guess it's still the case. We're still just under 10% infected in this country, at least according to reports, that are based on actual test results. I mean, there have been estimations out there that, in fact, we are closer to, 50% infected or whatever, or 30% infected. 100 million plus people really have been infected, but not all the infections have been detected by testing at this point. That's certainly a possibility. But anyway, I guess what I was wondering is, what if we got to a situation where Democrats were largely protected from infection by the vaccine and Republicans largely weren't, for real? They actually weren't getting this thing, and there's just plenty of victims to go around for the coronavirus just to continue circulating. Not only would we not reach herd immunity, I guess my question is, what would it take, to establish something like that? I was just sort of, I guess, fantasizing about, well, what if we have the 2022 midterm elections and Republicans are sure they're going to sweep back into power in the House and the Senate and then be poised to win back the presidency in 2024, and Trump may or may not be running for it or whatever. But suppose just all of a sudden, oh my gosh, like for some weird reason, Republicans expected to take over the House instead lose 40, 50 more seats in the House. And there's just this enormous Democratic majority. Like, I don't really know polling reasons to say that could happen. It's just a terrible prediction, I think, at this point. But suppose it just turned out that come 2022, some enormous amount of Republican voters, through their own denialism, are dead from coronavirus. Like, I've said it before that this coronavirus, it turns out, because of the political nature of everything to Republicans, and particularly to Trump Republicans, it was just like a neutron bomb for morons. I mean, imagine introducing a deadly disease that could just target and reduce the voting population of the most Republican districts in the country. I mean, is it not the answer to Democratic prayers in a way? Like, you don't want to plot this. You can't be going around murdering Republicans. But if nature wants to murder Republicans and Republicans want nature to murder them, I don't know what I can do about it. I'm sorry. I can't force you to take the vaccine, and I can't force you to survive to the 2022 or 2024 elections either. And if you're dying, I'm sure that's a tragedy on a micro level for some people, but on a macro level, there's a difference between micro and macroeconomics. They're related, it's true. I'm sad for families, happy for the country. Does it happen that way? I wouldn't bet on it. I'm just saying it's what's in the back of my mind. Now we can bring what's in the front of Greg Sargent's mind, which is surely more responsible than what I've just told you. But talk about, what is happening to Republicans who are catching coronavirus? What's going on in their heads? I would like to know. Jason Watts, a local Republican official in Michigan, committed the cardinal sin. He dared to criticize Donald Trump. When he went to defend himself against the inevitable blowback in a meeting with the former president's loyalists, very few were wearing masks. What a surprise, right? Then Watts tested positive for the coronavirus. Dang. It's too bad. You criticized Trump and then you got punished for it by the same virus that I wonder, were you criticizing him about his response to the virus? I don't know. Anyway, in so many ways, this story captures our times, but not in an I told you so kind of manner. Although, I'll add, I told you so. Instead, it points to how difficult it may prove to move past the wounds that Trump has inflicted on this nation, and how the eager complicity of many Republicans continues to make them all the worse. Watts recounted his travails to MLive, Michigan Live, and the Chicago Tribune, and the story is just starting to go national. I might actually go and read that, maybe by myself on the weekend, but we'll see how long it takes me to get through Greg's work here first. The trouble for Watts, a local GOP committee treasurer, I've forgotten now to go back to my old GOP pronunciation, the local GOP committee treasurer, started when he told the New York Times, that's always trouble, that he had never voted for Trump. Watts lamented the GOP's lockstep loyalty to Trump because this undertone of hatred, this fealty at all costs, it's going to damage us. And I think he's right. The punishment, of course, was swift. As Watts recounts, he was summoned to a meeting with other Republicans who were considering ousting him, and he says there was no Zoom option. MLive picks up the story at this point. It says, just a short grab from them, as he walked in wearing 2 cloth masks, we are supposed to be double masking, he said he noted other people were not wearing masks. I felt like I was going into a den of virus, he said of the setting. Watts caught the coronavirus. And by the way, there's never enough reporting about how many of the other people there, I mean, who had it? Somebody had it, obviously. How are they doing? I would like to know about how sick they are. But, of course, they don't talk to the press about it, so we never really find out. But, presumably they're ill somewhere and maybe even seriously. Can we just say it? With any luck, they're dead. Okay. I know. It's very bad. You can all go repent of that on your own time. Watts caught the coronavirus, and now he's recuperating in a hospital. I hope the other people didn't recuperate. Anyway, here's the lesson Watts took from the event. A mask shouldn't have a political party, Watts said. A vaccine shouldn't have a political party. But we've conjured these things to have these connotations. People are getting sick, and to put these connotations on these things does nobody any good. Yes, generally speaking, that's the American position. Secretly, of course, I hope all the Republicans get the virus and either vow to quit voting or drop dead. I mean, I want these people to get the virus and be gone from my society. I'm very selfish this way. It's a terrible solution. And a real discussion with actual responsible people will probably bring me around to a different conclusion. But let's just throw that out there as a hypothesis and test it. How about that? I'm willing to be scientific about it. Indeed, even if it turns out Watts didn't catch the coronavirus at the meeting, that's possible too, his anger at Trump's degradations captures something essential. Watts's diagnosis of a widespread fealty to Trump at all costs and his belief that rebuffing masks and vaccines has become a tribal marker of that fealty are dead on, and pinpoint factors that may continue poisoning our virus response. Indeed, a new Quinnipiac poll finds 45% of Republicans don't plan to get vaccinated. I just hope it somehow kills them, but does it really quickly, and then we don't all get it. That's the real problem. Next section of the piece here, Trump's lingering poison. It's hard to say how much of this represents Trump's lingering poison, though he ultimately got vaccinated. Yes, and I understand Ivanka released video of herself getting the vaccination too, and I guess we all wait to see whether she gets excommunicated, but maybe not. Though he ultimately got vaccinated, he spent a year casting the virus as largely an invention of hostile liberal elites, attacking government experts as enemies of virtuous Trump voters, and lockdowns as efforts to crush their economic aspirations, and ridiculing mask wearing as weakness. Whereas, wearing bronzer and foundation is somehow, in their world of hyper-masculinity, somehow not a sign of weakness. Okay, whatever. To be sure, other factors contribute to the problem. Soaring cases in Michigan are partly due to the Democratic governor's retreat and the administration's refusal to surge vaccines to the state. And I don't know that they're refusing permanently. Anyway, assuaging fears of vaccination in communities of color has preoccupied experts. Good project there. And some fear the decision to pause the use of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine could be fueling more hesitancy. By the way, on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, failed effort, I think, so far on the part of the J&J PR people who tried mightily, my wife pointed out to me in the last couple of days, tried mightily to rebrand it as the Janssen vaccine, which I guess is the actual name of the overseas, is it subsidiary or is the actual ownership? I don't even know. But the overseas outfit that is Johnson & Johnson that manufactured or invented or whatever, developed their vaccine. And I guess they gave some thought to trying to say, well, why don't we all go back to calling it Janssen? I mean, when it was doing well and it was getting good press, they were like, it's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Now, we're going to call it that because that's how we know the company in this country. So it was an easy sell for them. Then the hard sell. Oh, something crappy has happened. It's really Janssen. Call it that instead. But that was never going to work. Anyway, the continuing pull of the Trump vortex, Greg Sargent continues, is clearly a major culprit. The Post's Dan Diamond recently interviewed numerous GOP voters about their reluctance and found that some echo Trump's repeated contention that the coronavirus threat is overblown and simply don't trust the government's involvement. As Diamond reported, experts fear continued reluctance could complicate the push to reach herd immunity. And an Associated Press analysis finds vaccination rates in red states are lagging behind those in blue states, though demand still outstrips supply. A good sign. Still, Trump told Republican voters for a year that any belief in the coronavirus is as a severe public health threat, one that called forth a need to rely on scientific expertise and engage in organized self-sacrifice. No way you're going to get Trump's peoples to do self-sacrifice, constituted an act of disloyalty that would lend aid and comfort to his enemies and even to their enemies. How many Republican elites have forcefully and unambiguously repudiated this message? All of this has revealed something interesting about the ideological strains animating the Trump-era GOP, or GOP, of course. The new voters Trump brought into the GOP coalition. Look, GOP's really never going to fly either, but I'm going to keep trying. It's often said, are more populist and open to government action on behalf of the common good than more conventional small government Republicans are. And indeed, for months, the attacks on public health measures and downplaying of the virus did display a populist impulse. The story was that liberal and democratic elites, fully aware that lockdowns would not harm the cosmopolitan laptop class, were deliberately denying working-class heartlanders the opportunity to return to church, local social events, and virtuous hands-on work. But what's surprising is how easily this populism melded with a much more conventional and ideological, rigid anti-statism, congealing in college dorm level notions of individual liberty and the mass shunning of collective action in response to a major public health crisis, contributing to extraordinarily terrible consequences. As Will Wilkinson aptly puts it, this ideology has devolved to the point where tens of millions of Republicans feel entitled to behave as if there were no pandemic, something that has hardened into a foundational principle. And for untold numbers of voters, it's backslid to little more than a marker of tribal loyalty to the disgraced failure who did so much to make it all possible. We can only hope the damage will be limited going forward, and of course I hope limited to them. But as Watts suggests in his lament, it's hard to be optimistic. And the real problem, I'm sure, is that the viruses just don't really work that way. And if it hangs on and we don't reach herd immunity, and especially if it turns out that we're going to need boosters for our vaccines within a year anyway, as was the report yesterday, and we've been suspecting for a while now, then yeah, it'll come around to bite some of us as well, not to mention the 5% who will still become infected despite being fully vaccinated, or could be expected to become infected anyway. So that's the real problem. But in the meantime, what can I tell you? The virus has a year to wipe out as many of these Republicans as possible, and I encourage you to get cracking on that job. All right, let's see. Probably time just for one teaser or another. I'm going to go in this direction. A talking points memo piece I picked up. Might even be able to squeeze it all in there. Just following up on the investigations and occasional arrests of Capitol insurrectionists. And here's another interesting and somewhat extraordinary story. Alleged Capitol insurrectionists foiled plan to flee to Switzerland lands him in jail. Remember, of course, that all these people came to storm the Capitol out of economic anxiety, but some of them took private jets and some of them were trying to flee to Switzerland. And it's just kind of weird. Summer Concepcion writes this for TPM. An alleged Capitol insurrectionist's unsuccessful plans to escape to Switzerland to avoid extradition led to time in custody. In court documents obtained by CNN, prosecutors said Jeffrey Sable, S-A-B-O-L, briefly returned to his Colorado home after allegedly breaching the Capitol and assaulting two police officers before traveling to Boston on January 9th with the intention of flying out to Switzerland. Sable allegedly told law enforcement that he tried to make his trip, quote, look natural, with his plans to go skiing at his destination because of his economic anxiety and how heartland American he is. Sable, however, retreated from his plans of a Swiss getaway upon seeing officers at the airport in Boston, becoming worried that law enforcement was searching for him, although there's usually cops, but okay. Sable then ditched his plans, I'm glad he did, rented a car and began driving south. Sable, it's hard to ski down south, but okay, Sable threw his phone out the window while driving because he assumed that officers were following him. Or at least his phone, I guess, is what his thinking was. Police in New York in New City, New York, not New York, New York, but New City, New York, pulled Sable over on January 11th for driving erratically, something that even happens among white people, apparently. They allegedly found Sable covered in blood with severe lacerations on his thighs and arms and claimed that he tried to commit suicide. He does need some help. It's probably wise to put him in protective custody at this point. Sable allegedly issued numerous disordered remarks, such as, I am tired, I am done fighting, my wounds are self-inflicted, I was fighting tyranny in the D.C. Capitol. That's probably the most of the disordered remarks that he uttered. And I am wanted by the FBI. Well, at least you're wanted. It's nice to be wanted somewhere, right? Police said they then recovered razor blades, electronic devices, a passport, social security card, which I don't think you have to take with you to go to Switzerland, but whatever, airplane tickets, and a green backpack and tan jacket that allegedly matched video footage from the Capitol riot in Sable's car. A day after Sable was taken to Westchester Medical Center in Valhalla, New York, he allegedly admitted to officers that he had taken part in the deadly Capitol insurrection where, according to prosecutors, he jumped over barricades and dragged an officer down the steps. According to prosecutors, Sable tried to downplay his actions by claiming that he was helping one of the officers, who he patted on the back and told, we got you, man. Yeah, we got you and dragged you down the steps. Anyway, court documents said Sable also told police that he deleted text messages and a video of himself on the day of the Capitol attack. Sable believed then President Trump's baseless claims of a stolen 2020 presidential election, according to court documents. And what can I tell you? The guy tries to escape to Switzerland. There's a little bit more to the story. You can't get it all in there, but might make fun reading for you over the weekend. Once again, that economic anxiety getting the better of them. Everyone's fleeing to Switzerland these days. It's a very blue-collar thing to do. Next up, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Let's see what he's got on tap after this.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, he starts out with this note. A Colorado geophysicist will remain jailed for his part in the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Is Sobel a geophysicist, or is Colorado just rife with these insurrectionists? There's more, of course. Florida's racist anti-riot bill heading to DeSantis' desk for signing. Guess what's going to happen next?